I'm Kimberly Gonzalez, and I never imagined that my sister stealing my wedding venue would lead me to purchase an entire city block and effectively cancel her marriage before it could happen. When Victoria took my dream venue using forged documents and family connections, she thought she had won our lifelong competition. What she didn't realize was that her theft would trigger a chain of events that would give me the power to control not just where she could get married, but whether she could get married at all. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The day I discovered what Victoria had done, I was sitting in my downtown Phoenix law office reviewing contracts for a major real estate development deal. My assistant buzzed in to tell me that someone from Moonrise Gardens was on the line, calling about a scheduling conflict with my wedding venue. I had booked Moonrise Gardens 8 months earlier, a stunning desert botanical venue on the outskirts of Scottsdale that specialized in intimate luxury ceremonies. The $35,000 non-refundable deposit had been the largest single expense of my life, paid from savings I had accumulated through years of working 60-hour weeks at one of Phoenix's most prestigious law firms. When the venue coordinator, Maria Santos, explained that my reservation had been transferred to another member of the Gonzalez family, and that my September date was no longer available, I felt the blood drain from my face. Victoria had somehow convinced them she was authorized to make changes to my booking, presenting documentation that appeared to transfer the entire reservation to her name for a June ceremony. The coordinator seemed genuinely confused, mentioning that the paperwork had come through their corporate office and appeared legitimate, complete with what looked like my signature and authorization codes. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone, and immediately called my fiancé, Michael Chen, a successful architect who had been just as excited about our venue choice as I was. When I explained what had happened, the silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. Michael had witnessed Victoria's behavior toward me for the 3 years we had been together, and he understood immediately what this meant. This wasn't just about a venue. This was about my sister's need to take anything that mattered to me and claim it as her own. Growing up in a sprawling ranch house in Anthem, Arizona, Victoria and I had lived what appeared to be a charmed life. Our father, Roberto Gonzalez, owned a successful chain of automotive dealerships across the Southwest, while our mother, Diana, managed luxury real estate properties for high-net-worth clients. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. 2 beautiful daughters, financial success, and a gorgeous home with mountain views. But inside our house, a different dynamic played out daily. Victoria, who was 18 months older than me, had established herself as the golden child from an early age. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to charm adults while systematically undermining me in ways that were difficult to prove or explain. When I was 7 years old and won first place in a regional spelling bee, Victoria convinced our parents that I had been practicing with a tutor, which wasn't true, and that her participation in the same competition would be unfair to other children since we had unfair advantages. When I made varsity tennis as a sophomore in high school, Victoria suddenly developed an interest in tennis and convinced our parents to hire a private coach, ultimately earning a spot on the team as well and somehow becoming team captain despite joining 2 years after me. The pattern was always the same. Victoria would identify something that brought me recognition or joy, then find a way to either diminish my achievement or surpass it through whatever means necessary. Our parents, perhaps overwhelmed by the complexity of managing 2 ambitious daughters, consistently chose the path of least resistance, which meant giving Victoria what she wanted to avoid her dramatic emotional outbursts. I learned early that confronting this dynamic directly only resulted in being labeled as jealous or competitive, so I adapted by working harder and achieving more, hoping that eventually my accomplishments would speak for themselves. After high school, I pursued my undergraduate degree at Arizona State University, while Victoria chose a smaller liberal arts college in California, giving us both some breathing room for the first time in our lives. I excelled academically and was accepted to law school at the University of Arizona, while Victoria changed majors 3 times and graduated with a degree in communications that she never really used professionally. Instead, she returned to Phoenix and worked sporadically in our mother's real estate business, charming clients during property showings, but struggling with the detailed paperwork and follow-through that successful real estate required. I met Michael during my 2nd year practicing corporate law, when his architectural firm needed legal counsel for a complex zoning dispute involving a mixed-use development project. Our professional relationship evolved into friendship, then romance, built on mutual respect and shared values around hard work and integrity. Michael saw through Victoria's superficial charm immediately, noting how she seemed to study my reactions during family gatherings, as if she were taking notes on what mattered to me so she could later compete for the same things. When Michael proposed to me on a hiking trail overlooking Camelback Mountain, using a ring he had designed himself that incorporated elements of both our cultural backgrounds, I felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood and valued me. We spent months planning our perfect wedding, envisioning an intimate ceremony that would celebrate our union without the drama and competition that had defined so much of my family life. Moonrise Gardens had felt like the ideal choice, a venue that was elegant and meaningful, without being ostentatious or attention-seeking. Victoria's engagement to Bradley Morrison came just 6 weeks after Michael's proposal to me. Bradley was everything Victoria typically found attractive in men: tall, conventionally handsome, and wealthy through family money rather than personal accomplishment. His father owned a successful construction company that had built half the luxury developments in Scottsdale, and Bradley worked in the family business with the kind of guaranteed success that comes from nepotism rather than merit. Victoria announced their engagement at our family's monthly dinner, presenting a ring that was notably larger than mine and making pointed comments about how Bradley had insisted on only the best for his future wife. The speed of their relationship had surprised everyone, including Victoria's closest friends, who privately questioned whether she truly loved Bradley or was simply responding to my engagement with characteristic competitiveness. But I chose to believe that maybe Victoria had finally found her own path to happiness, one that didn't require taking anything from me. I was wrong. As I sat in my office that afternoon, processing the theft of my wedding venue, I realized that Victoria had escalated our lifelong competition to a level I had never imagined possible. This wasn't borrowing a dress or copying a hairstyle. This was theft, fraud, and a deliberate attempt to destroy one of the most important days of my life. But Victoria had made a critical miscalculation. Unlike our childhood, where our parents had consistently enabled her behavior, I was now an adult with my own resources, professional connections, and legal expertise. What Victoria didn't know was that my work in corporate law had given me extensive experience with real estate transactions, municipal regulations, and the complex web of permits and licenses required for various business operations, including wedding venues. She also didn't know that the real estate development deal I had been working on involved properties throughout the city of Scottsdale, including the area where Moonrise Gardens was located. Most importantly, she had no idea that my client for this deal was prepared to invest significantly more money than originally planned if the right opportunity presented itself. As I began to formulate my response to Victoria's theft, I realized that she had unwittingly provided me with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the difference between taking what belongs to someone else and building something powerful from the ground up. If Victoria wanted to play games with venues and reservations, I was prepared to change the rules of the game entirely. The roots of Victoria's entitled behavior traced back to our early childhood in ways that our parents either couldn't see or chose to ignore. When I was 5 years old, Victoria convinced me to trade my new bicycle for her broken roller skates, telling me that roller skates were more sophisticated and that bicycles were for babies. When our parents discovered the Trade. They made Victoria give me back my bicycle, but they also bought her a new pair of roller skates, to be fair. The message was clear. Victoria's desires would always be accommodated, even when she had acted deceptively. Our father, Roberto, had built his automotive empire through shrewd business decisions and an intuitive understanding of what customers wanted. He could negotiate million-dollar deals with suppliers and read market trends with remarkable accuracy. But when it came to his daughters, he seemed completely blind to Victoria's manipulative tendencies. Roberto had grown up poor in Tucson, the son of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for their children's education, and he was determined that his daughters would never want for anything. This generous impulse, however, became a weapon in Victoria's hands. Our mother Diana presented a more complex case. As a successful real estate agent who dealt with wealthy clients daily, she understood manipulation and power dynamics in professional settings. She could spot a dishonest client or a predatory business partner from across a room. But with Victoria, Diana seemed to operate under the assumption that acknowledging her older daughter's problematic behavior would somehow damage Victoria's self-esteem or create lasting psychological harm. Instead, she consistently reframed Victoria's actions in the most charitable light possible. When Victoria was 12 and I was 10, she discovered that I had been selected for a gifted and talented program at our school. Rather than celebrating my achievement, Victoria became sullen and withdrawn, claiming that the selection process had been unfair because she hadn't been properly considered. Despite the fact that Victoria had never shown particular academic aptitude and had actually declined to take the assessment test, our parents arranged for private tutoring to help her catch up to the gifted program standards. When Victoria still didn't qualify after 6 months of expensive tutoring, our parents convinced the school to create a junior mentor position that would allow Victoria to participate in some gifted program activities. The pattern extended beyond academics, into every area of our lives. When I developed an interest in photography during middle school, saving my allowance to buy a decent camera and spending hours learning about composition and lighting, Victoria suddenly announced her intention to become a fashion photographer. Our parents immediately enrolled her in an expensive summer photography workshop in Santa Fe, complete with professional equipment that cost more than my entire setup. Victoria attended the workshop, but lost interest in photography within months of returning home, leaving her expensive camera equipment to gather dust in her closet. High school brought new opportunities for Victoria to demonstrate her talent, for appropriating my interests and achievements. When I joined the debate team as a freshman, Victoria initially mocked it as nerdy and pointless. But when I began winning regional competitions and receiving recognition from the school administration, Victoria's perspective shifted dramatically. She convinced our parents that debate skills would be essential for her future career in communications and demanded to join the team. Despite having no experience or natural aptitude for formal debate, Victoria managed to secure a position on the varsity team through her charm and our parents' advocacy with the coach. Victoria's approach to debate was entirely different from mine. While I prepared meticulously, researching arguments and anticipating counterpoints, Victoria relied on her natural charisma and emotional appeals. She was surprisingly effective with certain judges who were swayed by her presentation style rather than the substance of her arguments. During one particularly important regional competition, Victoria was scheduled to compete in the same category as me. The night before the tournament, she claimed to have food poisoning and couldn't participate, but suggested that I should withdraw as well, in solidarity, since we were a team. When I refused to withdraw, Victoria accused me of being selfish and unsupportive, a narrative our parents seemed to accept without question. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The summer before my senior year, I was offered an internship at a prestigious law firm in downtown Phoenix, an opportunity that could significantly impact my college applications and future career prospects. Victoria, who had shown no previous interest in law, suddenly decided that she too wanted to explore legal careers. She convinced our parents to use their connections to secure her an internship at a different law firm, one that was actually more prestigious than mine. Victoria lasted 3 weeks at her internship before quitting, claiming that the work was too boring and that she had realized law wasn't for her. However, she made sure to quit only after college application season had passed, ensuring that her prestigious internship would appear on her applications while preventing me from applying to transfer to her firm for the remaining weeks of the summer. College applications revealed perhaps the most concerning example of Victoria's behavior. While I had worked diligently throughout high school to maintain excellent grades and build a strong extracurricular profile, Victoria had coasted on her natural charm and our parents' expectations that their daughters would both attend prestigious universities. When Victoria's first round of college applications resulted in several rejections from her top choice schools, she became increasingly desperate and volatile. During this period, I discovered that Victoria had been going through my personal belongings, including my college application essays and recommendation letters. When I confronted her about this invasion of privacy, she claimed she was just trying to understand what made a successful application, and that I should be flattered that she valued my work enough to study it. Our parents sided with Victoria, suggesting that siblings should help each other and that I was being unnecessarily secretive about my college preparation. The most disturbing incident occurred when I learned that Victoria had contacted several of my teachers and asked them to write recommendation letters for her using similar language and examples that they had used in my letters. She presented this request as a family emergency, claiming that her original recommenders had become unavailable due to various crises. 2 teachers actually complied with her request before realizing what had happened and contacting me directly to apologize for the confusion. When I brought this to our parents' attention, providing clear evidence of Victoria's deceptive behavior, their response was to arrange a family meeting where Victoria tearfully explained that she was struggling with anxiety about college admissions and had made poor choices under pressure. Rather than facing any consequences for her actions, Victoria received increased support and encouragement, including therapy sessions that focused on building her confidence rather than addressing her manipulative tendencies. Throughout our teenage years, I developed coping mechanisms that would serve me well in my future legal career. I learned to document important events, keep detailed records of my achievements, and always have backup plans when Victoria was involved in any situation that mattered to me. I also learned to keep my most important goals and relationships private for as long as possible, knowing that Victoria's interference was virtually guaranteed once she identified something she wanted for herself. These experiences taught me valuable lessons about human nature, power dynamics, and the importance of building independence and self-reliance. While Victoria was learning that tears and manipulation could usually get her what she wanted, I was developing actual skills, work ethic, and professional relationships based on merit rather than family connections. I didn't realize at the time that these lessons would become the foundation for my eventual response to her wedding venue theft. By the time we reached adulthood, Victoria and I had settled into an uneasy coexistence where I pursued my legal career, while she drifted between various jobs in our mother's real estate business. I thought that perhaps maturity and separate life paths would diminish her need to compete with me. The theft of my wedding venue proved that I had been naive about Victoria's capacity for growth and change. The discovery that Victoria had stolen my wedding venue unfolded in stages, each revelation more shocking than the last. After my initial conversation with Maria Santos at Moonrise Gardens, I immediately drove to the venue to speak with someone in person. The 40-minute drive from downtown Phoenix to Scottsdale gave me time to process what had happened and begin formulating questions that needed answers. Moonrise Gardens sat on 12 acres of meticulously landscaped desert terrain, featuring native cacti, flowering desert plants, and dramatic rock formations that created natural amphitheaters for ceremonies. The main building was a stunning example of contemporary southwestern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the surrounding landscape and the distant mountains. When I had first toured the venue 8 months earlier with Michael, we had both known immediately that this was where we wanted to begin our married life together. The venue's general manager, Patricia Wells, met me in the main lobby with obvious discomfort written across her face. She was a professional woman in her 50s who had managed high-end events for over 2 decades, and it was clear that the situation with my reservation was unprecedented in her experience. Patricia led me to her office and pulled out a thick file containing all the documentation related to what she believed to be a legitimate transfer of my booking. The paperwork was more sophisticated than I had expected. Victoria had not simply called and claimed authority to make changes to my reservation. Instead, she had submitted a complete transfer request through the venue's corporate office in California, including what appeared to be my notarized signature on official transfer documents. The signature was remarkably close to my actual signature, suggesting that Victoria had practiced extensively or possibly traced it from other documents. More disturbing was the supporting documentation that Victoria had provided. She had included copies of emails that appeared to be from my law firm's official email system, discussing the need to change wedding dates due to a significant case conflict that would require my presence in court during my originally scheduled wedding weekend. The emails referenced specific case numbers and legal terminology that demonstrated considerable knowledge of how law firms actually operate. Patricia showed me additional correspondence where Victoria had identified herself as my wedding coordinator and explained that I was too busy with trial preparation to handle the venue changes personally. Victoria had even provided what appeared to be a power of attorney document giving her authority to make decisions about my wedding arrangements. The document looked official, complete with what seemed to be proper legal formatting and notarization. When I examined the power of attorney more carefully, however, I immediately identified several problems. The notary seal was from a notary in California who, according to the documents, had supposedly witnessed my signature in Phoenix on a date when I could prove I had been in court all day. Additionally, the legal language contained subtle errors that suggested it had been copied from a template rather than prepared by an actual attorney. Patricia apologized profusely for accepting the documentation without additional verification, but explained that the transfer had come through their corporate office with apparent legal authentication. The venue management company operated facilities in 12 states and processed hundreds of event transfers annually, making individual verification of each transaction impractical. Victoria had clearly researched their procedures and exploited the gap between their local venue operations and their corporate administrative systems. The most infuriating aspect of the theft was the timeline Victoria had chosen. She had submitted her transfer request just 2 weeks after announcing her engagement to Bradley Morrison, at a time when I was consumed with a major trial that had kept me working 16-hour days for 3 consecutive weeks. Victoria had known about my trial schedule because our mother had mentioned it during a family dinner, expressing concern about how hard I was working and whether the stress might affect my wedding planning. During that busy period, I had not been monitoring my wedding vendor communications as closely as usual, trusting that everything was proceeding according to plan since all major decisions had already been made and deposits paid. Victoria had exploited this window of reduced attention, knowing that I would not discover the venue theft until it was too late to reverse through normal channels. The financial implications were staggering. My original $35,000 deposit was non-refundable and had been applied to Victoria's new reservation. If I wanted to book an alternative venue for my September wedding date, which was now only 5 months away, I would need to pay new deposits and likely accept significantly higher pricing due to the short timeline. Most premium venues in the Phoenix area were already booked for September, the most popular wedding month in Arizona due to the more moderate temperatures. Patricia offered to help me explore options for rescheduling Victoria's June ceremony to accommodate my original September date, but explained that this would require Victoria's voluntary cooperation since she was now the legally recognized client. When Patricia called Victoria's phone number in my presence, Victoria's response was swift and uncompromising. She had no intention of changing her wedding date and suggested that I should have been more careful about managing my own wedding arrangements. The conversation revealed another layer of Victoria's calculated cruelty. She had specifically chosen a June wedding date, knowing that it was the beginning of Phoenix's extreme summer season, when outdoor ceremonies become nearly impossible due to temperatures exceeding 115 degrees. By taking my September date and forcing me into summer months, Victoria was ensuring that any alternative venue I might find would be significantly less desirable and more expensive due to the need for extensive air conditioning and indoor facilities. When I left Moonrise Gardens that afternoon, I realized that Victoria had not simply stolen my venue in a moment of impulsive jealousy. This had been a carefully planned operation that demonstrated considerable forethought, research, and malicious intent. She had studied the venue's transfer procedures, created convincing legal documentation, exploited my trial schedule, and chosen her timing to maximize the damage to my wedding plans, while ensuring that reversing her actions would be extremely difficult. The drive back to Phoenix gave me time to consider my options. I could pursue legal action against Victoria for forgery and fraud, but the family consequences would be severe, and the timeline for resolution uncertain. I could attempt to book an alternative venue and absorb the financial loss, essentially, rewarding Victoria's theft by allowing her to benefit from it without consequences. Or I could explore more creative solutions that would address not just the immediate problem, but the underlying pattern of behavior that had enabled Victoria to believe she could take whatever she wanted from me without facing real consequences. That evening, Michael and I met for dinner at our usual restaurant near my office to discuss the situation. Michael's reaction was immediate and unequivocal. Victoria's actions constituted criminal fraud and should be reported to the authorities regardless of family consequences. His anger on my behalf was both touching and validating, confirming that my reaction to Victoria's theft was not an overreaction or sibling jealousy. As we talked through the implications of various responses, I found myself thinking about my current client, Harrison Development Group, and their ongoing acquisition of properties throughout the Scottsdale area. Harrison was one of the largest commercial real estate developers in the Southwest, with a particular focus on mixed-use developments that combined retail, office, and entertainment facilities. Their current project involved assembling a significant portfolio of properties for a major development that would reshape several blocks of central Scottsdale. A thought began forming in my mind as I considered the intersection of my professional knowledge and Victoria's theft. What if there was a way to respond to Victoria's actions that would not only recover my wedding venue, but also demonstrate the difference between taking what belongs to someone else and building real power through legitimate means? What if Victoria's theft had inadvertently provided me with the perfect opportunity to show her what actual control looked like? The conversation with Michael evolved from discussing immediate responses to exploring longer-term strategies that could address the fundamental imbalance in my family dynamic. Victoria had always believed that her charm and manipulation gave her power over situations and people. But real power, the kind that comes from professional expertise, financial resources, and strategic thinking, operated on a completely different level than Victoria had ever experienced. The Monday morning after discovering Victoria's venue theft, I arrived at my office with a new sense of purpose that extended far beyond wedding planning. My years in corporate law had taught me that information was the foundation of any successful strategy, and I needed to understand exactly what Victoria had done and what resources were available to respond appropriately. My first call was to Marcus Rodriguez, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases and had worked with my firm on several complex litigation matters. Marcus was a former FBI agent who understood the nuances of document fraud and had contacts throughout various governmental agencies. When I explained the sophistication of Victoria's forged documentation, Marcus immediately recognized that this was not amateur work. Within 48 hours, Marcus had traced the notary seal used on Victoria's fake power of attorney to a legitimate notary in Los Angeles who had reported her seal stolen 3 months earlier. The theft had occurred during a break-in at a document preparation service where the notary worked part-time, suggesting that Victoria had either orchestrated the theft herself or was working with someone who had access to stolen notary materials. This revelation elevated Victoria's crime from simple forgery to involvement in a broader criminal enterprise. More disturbing was Marcus's discovery that Victoria had used similar documentation to open a business credit line in my name 6 months earlier. The credit line had been used to finance what appeared to be legitimate business expenses for a consulting company that existed only on paper. Victoria had been careful to make regular payments on the account, keeping it in good standing to avoid triggering any alerts that might have led to earlier discovery of her activities. The consulting company, registered as Desert Bloom Events, listed Victoria as the CEO and claimed to specialize in luxury event planning and venue management. The business registration included a fake business license, fabricated client testimonials, and a professional website that featured photographs of events that Marcus traced to other event planning companies in different states. Victoria had essentially created an entire fictional business identity to support her other fraudulent activities. My investigation into Victoria's recent activities revealed a pattern of behavior that was far more extensive than anyone in my family had realized. She had been systematically exploiting our family connections and my professional reputation to gain access to exclusive venues, vendors, and services throughout the Phoenix area. Several high-end caterers and florists had extended credit to Desert Bloom Events, based on references to my law firm and our father's automotive dealerships. The scope of Victoria's deception became clear when I contacted the venue management company that operated Moonrise Gardens. Their corporate office in California had processed Victoria's transfer request based on her identification as a senior associate at my law firm, a title she had fabricated along with a fake employee ID card that used my firm's actual logo and formatting. The company's verification process had failed because Victoria had provided a working phone number that redirected to a sophisticated answering service that confirmed her employment when the venue's staff called to verify her credentials. Most shocking was my discovery that Victoria had been intercepting and redirecting my professional mail for several months. She had submitted a change of address form with the Postal Service, claiming to be my assistant, and explaining that I was relocating my home office due to construction. This mail redirection had allowed Victoria to monitor my business correspondence and identify opportunities to exploit my professional relationships. The mail interception explained how Victoria had obtained detailed information about my work with Harrison Development Group, including confidential project timelines and property acquisition plans. She had been reading my client communications and using that information to time her venue theft and other fraudulent activities for maximum impact. The violation felt deeply personal, as if Victoria had been living inside my professional life, without my knowledge. My investigation also revealed the true nature of Victoria's relationship with Bradley Morrison. Through Marcus's contacts in the construction industry, I learned that Bradley's family business was facing significant financial difficulties due to cost overruns on several major projects. The Morrison Construction Company owed substantial amounts to subcontractors and suppliers, and Bradley personally was carrying significant debt that he had hidden from his family. Victoria's engagement to Bradley appeared to be based on mutual deception. He believed he was marrying into a wealthy family with extensive business connections, while she believed she was marrying into established wealth and social status. Neither had been honest about their actual financial situation or future prospects. Their wedding planning had involved extensive borrowing against future expectations that neither could realistically fulfill. The investigation into Bradley's background revealed additional concerning information. He had been engaged twice before, both times to women from prominent Arizona families, and both engagements had ended abruptly when his financial situation became known to his fiancé's families. Bradley's pattern suggested that he specifically targeted women from wealthy families as a strategy for addressing his own financial problems. This revelation shifted my perspective entirely. What I had initially viewed as a painful but relatively contained family dispute was actually an ongoing criminal enterprise that posed serious threats to innocent third parties. Victoria was not simply a jealous sister who had stolen my wedding venue. She was a sophisticated fraudster who was using me and my professional reputation as the foundation for increasingly serious criminal activities. The investigation had also revealed a crucial piece of information about Moonrise Gardens and the surrounding area. The venue sat on property that was zoned for mixed-use development and was located within the boundaries of a redevelopment district that offered significant tax incentives for major construction projects. More importantly, the property was directly adjacent to several parcels that Harrison Development Group had been attempting to acquire for their major Scottsdale project. My client had been frustrated by their inability to secure certain key properties in their target area, including the block where Moonrise Gardens was located. The current property owners had been resistant to selling, preferring to maintain their existing businesses rather than participate in a major redevelopment. However, if the right buyer could acquire enough contiguous properties to control the entire development area, the project's scope and profitability could increase dramatically. As I reviewed Harrison Development Group's acquisition maps and compared them to the location of Moonrise Gardens, I began to understand how Victoria's theft might have inadvertently provided me with the opportunity to solve multiple problems simultaneously. If I could find a way to acquire the properties that Harrison needed while also addressing Victoria's criminal activities, I might be able to demonstrate the difference between taking what belongs to someone else and building legitimate power through legal and ethical means. Armed with comprehensive evidence of Victoria's criminal activities, I scheduled a meeting with my client, Harrison Development Group, to discuss expanding their Scottsdale acquisition strategy. What I didn't immediately tell them was that my proposal would also serve as the foundation for addressing my sister's systematic fraud and theft. The meeting took place in Harrison's executive conference room, a glass-walled space overlooking downtown Phoenix with panoramic views of the surrounding desert mountains. David Harrison, the company's founder and CEO, listened intently as I presented my research on the Moonrise Gardens property block and its potential integration into their larger development project. The numbers were compelling. Acquiring the entire 12-acre block, including Moonrise Gardens and 6 adjacent properties, would create a contiguous development area that could support a mixed-use complex worth over $200 million. The current property owners had been resistant to individual sales, but a coordinated acquisition strategy could overcome their objections through superior offers and streamlined closing processes. What made my proposal unique was my insider knowledge of the venue industry and the specific vulnerabilities of the Moonrise Gardens operation. Through my investigation of Victoria's theft, I had learned that the venue was struggling financially due to high maintenance costs for their elaborate landscaping and increasing competition from newer event facilities. The property owners were carrying significant debt and would likely be receptive to a cash offer that allowed them to exit the hospitality business entirely. David Harrison was intrigued by the proposal but concerned about the timeline and complexity of acquiring multiple properties simultaneously. I addressed his concerns by outlining a comprehensive strategy that leveraged my legal expertise, my professional relationships throughout the Phoenix real estate community, and most importantly, my detailed knowledge of the current tenants, operational challenges, and financial pressures. The key to the strategy was speed and coordination. Rather than approaching each property owner separately over several months, I proposed that Harrison commit to acquiring all 6 properties within a 30-day window, using my law firm to handle all legal documentation and my knowledge of local zoning regulations to streamline the approval process. This approach would prevent property owners from coordinating their responses or inflating their asking prices based on Harrison's interest in the area. David agreed to move forward with the expanded acquisition plan, authorizing me to begin immediate negotiations with all 6 property owners. The budget he approved was substantial enough to make offers that would be very difficult for the current owners to refuse, particularly given their various financial pressures. Most importantly for my personal situation, the timeline meant that Harrison would acquire Moonrise Gardens well before Victoria's planned June wedding date. With Harrison's authorization secured, I began the most challenging phase of my plan: direct confrontation with Victoria about her criminal activities. I arranged to meet her at a coffee shop near our parents' house, choosing a public location where she would be less likely to create a dramatic scene. I also invited Michael to join us, both for emotional support and as a witness to whatever Victoria might say during our conversation. Victoria arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes late, a deliberate power play that she had used throughout our childhood to signal her belief that her time was more valuable than mine. She was dressed in designer clothing that I recognized as being far beyond her typical budget, likely purchased with money from her fraudulent credit accounts or gifts from Bradley's family. Her confident demeanor suggested that she believed she had successfully stolen my venue without facing any serious consequences. I began the conversation by presenting Victoria with copies of the evidence that Marcus had gathered about her fraudulent activities. The fake business registration for Desert Bloom events, the stolen notary documentation, the mail redirection forms, and the credit accounts opened in my name were laid out systematically on the table between us. Victoria's reaction was immediate and telling. Rather than expressing surprise or confusion, she immediately became defensive and began calculating how to minimize the implications of what I had discovered. Victoria's first response was to claim that everything she had done was technically legal because we were family members and she had assumed I would eventually approve of her actions. This argument demonstrated both her fundamental misunderstanding of legal concepts and her persistent belief that family relationships somehow exempted her from normal rules and consequences. When I explained that identity theft and forgery were serious felonies regardless of family relationships, Victoria shifted to emotional manipulation tactics. She began crying and claimed that she had only taken these actions because she felt overshadowed by my professional success and needed to prove that she was capable of achieving something significant on her own. Victoria insisted that her wedding to Bradley represented her chance to finally establish herself as an independent adult, and that losing the venue would destroy her relationship and her prospects for future happiness. The performance was skillful and might have been effective with our parents, but I had spent too many years observing Victoria's manipulative behavior to be swayed by tears and emotional appeals. Michael's presence during the conversation proved crucial, as Victoria had clearly expected to handle me alone using the same tactics that had worked throughout our childhood. When her emotional manipulation failed to produce the desired response, Victoria became increasingly desperate and began making threats. She warned that if I took any action against her, she would tell our parents and extended family that I was jealous of her engagement and was trying to sabotage her wedding out of spite. Victoria also threatened to expose what she claimed were unethical business practices at my law firm, suggesting that she had evidence of wrongdoing that could damage my professional reputation. This threat backfired spectacularly, as it confirmed that Victoria had been systematically spying on my professional activities and planning to use confidential information as leverage against me. Her willingness to threaten my career demonstrated that she viewed our conflict as total warfare, rather than a family dispute that could be resolved through compromise. The conversation escalated when I informed Victoria that Harrison Development Group was in the process of acquiring Moonrise Gardens and the surrounding properties for a major redevelopment project. Victoria initially dismissed this as an empty threat, assuming that I was bluffing to pressure her into returning my venue reservation. When I showed her the signed acquisition agreements and development timeline, however, her confident facade began to crack. Victoria demanded to know how I had managed to arrange the property acquisition so quickly and whether I had used insider information from my legal practice to manipulate the real estate market. Her accusations revealed her fundamental assumption that everyone operated using the same unethical methods that she employed, and her inability to conceive that legitimate business success could be achieved through hard work and professional expertise rather than manipulation and fraud. When Victoria realized that the Moonrise Gardens property would indeed be unavailable for her June wedding, she attempted to negotiate an alternative arrangement. She proposed that I allow her to use the venue for her ceremony in exchange for her cooperation in resolving the fraud issues without involving law enforcement. Victoria seemed to believe that she could trade her stolen wedding venue back to me in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution for her other illegal activities. I explained that the property acquisition was already in motion and could not be reversed, and that her criminal activities had created legal obligations that extended beyond our personal dispute. The fraudulent business accounts, stolen identity documentation, and mail tampering represented crimes against multiple victims, including my law firm, various vendors throughout Phoenix, and the Postal Service. These issues could not be resolved through private family negotiations. Victoria's final gambit was to threaten suicide if I proceeded with exposing her criminal activities. This threat was particularly manipulative because Victoria knew that our family had a history of taking such statements very seriously, and that the threat might pressure me to prioritize her emotional well-being over legal and ethical considerations. However, Victoria had overplayed her hand by making this threat in Michael's presence, and his immediate response was to call emergency services and insist that Victoria be evaluated for her own safety. The arrival of paramedics and police officers at the coffee shop marked the end of Victoria's ability to control the narrative around her criminal activities. When the responding officers learned about the identity theft and fraud allegations, they advised me to file formal criminal complaints and provided information about victim resources and legal protections. Victoria's suicide threat had inadvertently created an official record of our dispute and established a timeline for law enforcement involvement. The weeks following my confrontation with Victoria unfolded with the precision and momentum of a well-orchestrated legal strategy. Harrison Development Group's acquisition of the Moonrise Gardens property block proceeded exactly as planned, with each property owner accepting our offers within the 30-day timeline I had established. The venue itself was purchased for $4.2 million, significantly above its market value but well within Harrison's budget for securing a key piece of their development puzzle. The property acquisition had immediate consequences for Victoria's wedding plans that extended far beyond simply losing her stolen venue. When Moonrise Gardens Management Company learned that the property had been sold to a developer who planned immediate demolition, they were legally obligated to cancel all existing reservations and refund deposits. However, since Victoria's reservation had been obtained through fraudulent documentation, her deposit refund was held pending investigation of the circumstances surrounding her booking. More significantly, the acquisition triggered a comprehensive review of the venues, business practices, and client relationships. The management company discovered that Victoria's Desert Bloom events had been used to secure vendor relationships and credit arrangements throughout the Phoenix wedding industry, creating potential liability issues that extended far beyond the venue itself. Several caterers, florists, and entertainment companies had extended credit to Victoria's fake business based on her fraudulent credentials and references to my family's reputation. The discovery of Victoria's extensive fraud network prompted the venue management company to file their own criminal complaints against her, independent of any action I might take. Their corporate legal department viewed Victoria's activities as a serious threat to their business model and reputation, particularly since she had successfully exploited their transfer procedures to steal reservations from legitimate clients. The company's involvement meant that Victoria would face criminal prosecution, regardless of whether our family chose to pursue charges. Bradley Morrison's reaction to these developments revealed the true nature of his relationship with Victoria and his own financial desperation. When he learned that Victoria had been engaging in systematic fraud and that their wedding venue was no longer available, Bradley immediately distanced himself from her and began exploring ways to protect himself from potential criminal liability. His family's construction company was already under financial pressure, and any association with fraud could jeopardize their remaining business relationships. Bradley's investigation into Victoria's background revealed additional fraudulent activities that even I had not discovered. She had been using their relationship to obtain credit cards and personal loans in both their names, accumulating significant debt that she had hidden from him while purchasing expensive items for their wedding and lifestyle. Victoria had also been promising potential wedding vendors that Bradley's family would provide payment guarantees for services, commitments that the Morrison family had never authorized. The most damaging revelation came when Bradley discovered that Victoria had been secretly recording their private conversations and those of his family members, apparently gathering information that she could use for future manipulation or blackmail. Victoria had been systematically documenting details about the Morrison family's business relationships, financial arrangements, and personal conflicts, creating files that suggested she viewed their relationship as a long-term fraud operation, rather than a genuine romantic partnership. Faced with evidence of Victoria's deception and the criminal investigations surrounding her activities, Bradley terminated their engagement and moved out of the luxury apartment they had been sharing. His family's attorney advised him to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations and to document all financial losses associated with Victoria's fraud for potential restitution claims. The Morrison family's rejection of Victoria was swift and complete, leaving her without the wealthy husband and social status she had been counting on to validate her criminal activities. My parents' reaction to these developments was perhaps the most emotionally complex aspect of the entire situation. Initially, they attempted to maintain their pattern of defending Victoria and minimizing her actions, suggesting that the criminal charges were excessive and that family disputes should be resolved privately. However, the involvement of multiple victims and law enforcement agencies made it impossible for them to continue treating Victoria's behavior as a simple case of sibling rivalry. The financial implications for my parents became clear when they learned about the credit accounts Victoria had opened using stolen information and forged documents. Several of these accounts listed my father's automotive dealerships as references and claimed business relationships that could potentially damage his commercial reputation. My mother's real estate business faced similar risks, as Victoria had used her connection to Diana's client network to establish credibility with various vendors and service providers. More personally devastating for my parents was the realization that Victoria had been exploiting their emotional support and financial assistance to fund her criminal activities. The money they had provided for her wedding expenses had been used to purchase equipment for document forgery and to pay for the sophisticated answering service that had enabled her to impersonate my law firm. Their well-intentioned generosity had inadvertently subsidized a criminal enterprise that threatened not only my career, but also their own business reputations. The legal proceedings against Victoria moved forward with surprising speed, largely due to the comprehensive documentation that Marcus had assembled and the cooperation of multiple victim organizations. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office assigned the case to their white-collar crime division, which specialized in complex fraud cases involving identity theft and business fraud. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, was an experienced attorney who recognized that Victoria's activities represented a sophisticated criminal operation rather than impulsive family conflict. Victoria's attempts to negotiate a plea bargain were complicated by the multiple jurisdictions and victim organizations involved in her crimes. The stolen notary materials connected her case to federal postal fraud charges, while the identity theft and business fraud violated both state and federal laws. Her fake business registration had been used to obtain vendor relationships across state lines, creating interstate commerce violations that elevated the seriousness of her charges. Perhaps most significantly for my situation, the criminal investigation revealed that Victoria had been planning to expand her fraudulent activities in ways that would have directly threatened innocent clients and colleagues. law enforcement discovered detailed plans for impersonating me. In legal matters, including research into specific client cases and court procedures. Victoria had been preparing to practice law under my credentials, potentially creating malpractice liability and ethics violations that could have destroyed my career and harmed vulnerable clients. My speaking engagements on this topic had evolved into a consulting practice that helped other professionals develop strategies for protecting themselves and their clients from family-based fraud and manipulation. The demand for this expertise had grown as law enforcement agencies reported increasing numbers of cases involving family members exploiting professional relationships for criminal purposes. My unique combination of personal experience and professional expertise had created opportunities to help other women and men recognize and respond to similar threats. Looking back on the events that had begun with Victoria's theft of my wedding venue, I could see how every challenge had ultimately contributed to personal and professional growth that would not have been possible under normal circumstances. The crisis had forced me to develop skills, relationships, and perspectives that had enhanced every aspect of my life, from my marriage to my career to my understanding of family dynamics and professional ethics. The transformation of the moonrise. Garden's site had become a symbol of the broader changes in my life and community. Where there had once been a struggling business that had been vulnerable to exploitation, there was now a thriving development that contributed to economic growth and community vitality. Where there had once been a dysfunctional family system that enabled destructive behavior, there were now relationships based on honesty, accountability, and mutual respect. Victoria's attempt to steal my future had inadvertently provided me with the opportunity to build something far more substantial and meaningful than anything she could have taken from me. The venue she had stolen was just a building, but the response to her theft had created professional relationships, community impact, and personal growth that would benefit not only my own life, but also the lives of many other people for years to come. As I signed the partnership documents that made me a principal in one of Arizona's most successful development companies, I reflected on the distance I had traveled from that devastating phone call about my stolen wedding venue. Victoria had thought she was taking my dream wedding location, but she had actually given me the catalyst to build a life that was more successful, more meaningful, and more authentic than anything I had previously imagined possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.